For the communication criteria of the chemistry IA, there are four main features we're looking for: clarity, structure, relevance and concision, and finally, scientific terminology and conventions. Let's take a look at clarity first of all. In order to identify this, the examiner will be asking the question, is the presentation clear? At the most basic level, you want to make sure that your report looks nice and neat. You'll need to make sure that images, tables and graphs are in the right place. Large chunks of text might be broken into smaller paragraphs. Calculations might be broken into steps. And graphs will need to be of a suitable size to identify key features. There is nothing worse than a page full of text and a tiny unreadable graph floating somewhere in the middle. Next, let's look at structure. For this criteria, an examiner might ask themselves, is this well structured? You'll want to check that each section leads on from the previous section in a logical manner. You'll want to make sure that you've explained why you've included certain bits of information. And you may also want to use subheadings in each section so that the structure is completely clear. Subheadings are particularly important when writing the first draft of your report to make sure that you're including all of the relevant information. You can always delete them later if you need the space. Thirdly, let's consider relevance and concision. Here an examiner will ask, is it relevant and concise? In order to make sure all of your report is relevant, you should ask at each section, how does this help respond to my research question? If you can't answer that question, then probably it's not relevant. In order to make sure your report is concise, at each section you might ask, can I present the same information in less words? If you can, then do so, and if you can't, that probably means it is concise. As an example of what not to do, a student once submitted a first draft related to measuring the casein protein found in milk, and they submitted half a page on the life cycle of a cow. Please don't do that. Finally, we need to think about scientific terminology and conventions. And an examiner will ask themselves, is the scientific terminology appropriate and correct? And the same for conventions. For scientific terminology, you might want to check things like specific language used in the background information section, names of chemicals and processes used in your report, and key terms like random error or uncertainty and systematic error. Conventions are scientifically agreed upon ways of doing things in an investigation. To make sure that your scientific conventions are appropriate and correct, you might want to consider things like making sure the decimal places in your uncertainty matches the decimal places of the data in that table. You'll need to check that all measured or calculated values have units. You'll need to consistently consider the use of decimal places or significant figures in calculations. You'll want to check that there are titles or labels on all images, tables and graphs in your report. And finally, make sure to reference information that is not your own. Remember that if you're unsure of scientific terminology or conventions, check with your teacher, just in case. And there you have it, the 4 things to consider in the communication criteria of your chemistry IA: clarity, structure, relevance and concision, and scientific terminology and conventions. Hopefully, this video was of some help.